Hello, and welcome to the FlexRay sponsored webinar, An Industry Perspective on Supplier Monitoring with a focus on foreign material contamination. I am Kevin Hobbs and will be your moderator for today's roundtable discussion. With me today is Amanda Fisher of Schreiber Foods and Kurt Westmoreland of FlexRay. Their formal introductions will be coming in a few minutes. We're thrilled that you have joined us today, and our goal is that we provide insights and valuable ideas in today's discussion to help you improve your overall food safety supplier monitoring program. A quick introduction to me. I'm Kevin Hobbs again. I've held numerous leadership roles in sales and marketing over the last 30 years with 3M, food safety business, Ecolab, and Hygiena, and I'm currently providing sales and marketing consulting to the food safety industry. My one industry accomplishment of note was that I was on the inaugural team to help establish the Minnesota Food Protection Association, the local affiliate of IAFP, back in 2014. But enough about me. Let's get into more of what you're on the call for today. So let's take a quick look at today's agenda. So we'll have a brief overview of the FlexRay business, some introductions of Kurt and Amanda, then the roundtable discussion and the Q&A sessions if we have time. So if we have time to submit a question, simply click on the Q&A button in the toolbar that you'll see in the menu bar, type in your question, hit send. We'll get to as many of those as we can towards the end of the webinar. I will discuss as many of those as we can, as I mentioned. And then we'll have a final wrap up and then log off. So what's FlexRay? Who is FlexRay? So they're the nation's largest foreign material inspection company, serving the majority of the largest food processing companies in North America. FlexRay inspects food products for all types of potential contaminants, including metal, plastic, rubber, gasket material, and bone. Its custom-built X-ray technology detects issues before products go to market, saving clients millions of dollars annually. They have 4 locations that you see on the map here, and also a new location coming in Nevada sometime soon. So I would like to now introduce today's panelists. This is Amanda Fisher. She received a chemistry degree at Indiana University. She's been with Schreiber Foods for the past 23 years. She's currently the Director of Food Safety and Quality Systems at Schreiber Foods. She volunteers with the Ice Age Trail Alliance and also serves as a Vice President on Einstein Project Board of Directors. Welcome, Amanda.
Thanks, Kevin. Happy to be here.
We also have Kurt Westmoreland. He started his food safety career as a microbiologist with Fielddale Farms, and moved on to Mariu Nutrisciences, Silica in the past, for 28 years there in general management and executive team roles. He joined FlexRay in early 2022 as a chief commercial officer. Throughout his career, he's been a very active membership, as you can see here, with many industry associations. Welcome, Kurt.
Thanks, Kevin. Looking forward to a good discussion today.
Thank you. Glad you are both with us and looking forward to a wonderful hour-long discussion here. To begin with, I think it'd be really good to just kind of cover what we'll be talking about today to maybe broaden this out a little bit. We'll be talking about supplier monitoring and its critical role in a comprehensive food safety and quality program. The webinar discussion, the panelists will discuss the risks that might be associated with ingredients and how to work with suppliers to ensure that they're taking necessary precautions to help minimize those risks. To begin with, I'd like to start with a general guidance around FDA guidance in particular regarding regulatory requirements regarding foreign material contamination. I'll show this, and maybe Amanda, would be great if you maybe walked us through some talking points or things to remember, point out regarding the current regulatory guidance.
Yep. Thanks, Kurt. I think it's good for the start of this discussion just to kind of ground ourselves with some of the regulatory requirements, and then we'll go into, how to actually use those in your different supply chain hazard and assessments. So overall, we do use in the FDA world, at least, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 117. As part of that regulation, we do have to perform a food safety risk assessment. And as part of that, then you're focusing on your ingredients. Specifically ingredients with a hazard or a history of association with a specific hazard, and then the preventive control around that. So we'll be talking about that today. And then do you apply that internally or externally at the supplier?
I mean, is there any guidance that you're aware of, or is there any place we could go for maybe the USDA part of this as well, or is there anything that you've heard of, Kurt or Amanda?
Yeah, we haven't seen anything that's as formal as this from a USDA perspective. But we do work very closely with USDA facilities. All the FlexRay facilities are actually audited and certified for via USDA and FDA. And if we're doing certain types of projects in a facility, i.e., you have to take product out of a case. In that situation, we actually have to have approval by our USDA inspector before we can take product out of the case. So,
excellent. All right. What are the most common foreign material issues prevalent in the food industry today? Like, what's the most prevalent things that we see in industry?
Yeah, so we'll break that down into really two different risks. So we have the inherent risk of the ingredient itself, and then the processing risk with handling that ingredient. So to start with the inherent risks, those are going to be from the ingredient itself or from the harvesting. So examples across different industries would be stones or glass and products that are harvested off the ground. So examples of those ingredients might be cocoa beans, coffee, or nuts. You can also have seeds, pits, or shells, which are part of the ingredient. Again, so olives, peaches, cherries, and nuts may contain, as you're harvesting them, the risks there. Bullets and BBs are one that different industries are concerned about, especially in agriculture products. And those are due to workers or others really shooting birds, rodents, or animals in the field, and then they become a foreign material. So one of the examples there would be raisins. Could often find BBs in raisins. Insects in agriculture products, so cereals, flour, cornmeal, rice, seeds, nuts, those different ingredients could have insects. And then another one that I think that, at least in some industries, maybe we don't think about and others do is hyperthermic needles used for livestock treatment could become an inherent risk into there. So again, inherent risks are specific to the ingredient itself or the harvesting of that ingredient. Processing risks are going to come from the equipment used to further manipulate that ingredient into the form you need. So the most common examples that we're going to see are metal, soft plastic, and hard plastic. But there could be others there. So again, glass could be a foreign material. If your ingredient is from a facility that packages in glass containers, then we need to be concerned about glass contamination. So think pasta sauces, pickles, jelly, things like that. Then the metal is going to come from metal rubbing, could be nuts, bolts, screws, steel wool. If steel wool is used as a sanitation aid, then controlling the steel wool could be a foreign material of metal. Stones could be from walls, ceilings, and floors in the facility, but also think about, again, treads of wheels or workers' shoes, depending on what that ingredient is. Could you have stones in workers' shoes that then make its way into the ingredient? Plastic could be from conveyor belts. It could be from packaging materials, aprons, different industries using different plastics. And then wood, again, was there wood in the field? If it was a harvested produce or boxes or pallets, all of those would be examples of sources of foreign material from the processing or further manipulating of the ingredient. Some examples from 2022 were rocks in cookies, insects in broccoli cheese soup, and pieces of plastic in frozen chicken strips. Those all led to some pretty major recalls in 2022 from the ingredient itself.
You're interestingly enough, Amanda, you mentioned BBs. We kind of look at birdshot and buckshot and those kind of things. And this time of year, we start to see more projects looking for those type of contaminants, due to the fact that you're into dove hunting season and those type of things. And so that natural occurrence of those getting out into the environment and into the ingredients is something that we're seeing pretty often now.
So these are just accidental bullets or BBs from just hunting birds or whatever that may land in a mammal, like a cow or whatever's being processed, that would actually show up in a foreign material.
Yeah, or get into an agricultural an ingredient like a corn or something like that, that then it gets ground.
Very interesting. The other one I thought was interesting was just again, going back to the harvesting part, was like the needles, like to do vaccinations and different things, that needles breaking off. That one was surprising to me, and what you covered. The rest of them.
Another area that's it's not common, but it's something that's been interesting that we've seen a couple of times is corrugated cardboard boxes, and depending on the quality of the manufacturer and the supplier of the box, we've actually seen some metal contaminants in the box itself. That will if the product is if the bag has any kind of a leak in it or the bag's broken, you could move from the box into the product. And it's not common, but it's something we've seen, and it was an eye-opening experience when we first saw that.
Yeah. The last one I thought was a little bit unusual would be like the rocks. So rocks could come in off boots, off of forklift, but remember, there's good separation in a plant. But have you seen that, Kurt, as well? Or is FlexRay seeing rocks in different products and at times, and that make it actually into production?
Yeah, it tends to be agricultural type products. Amanda mentioned some of the types, so I won't repeat that. But yeah, we have seen that. The other thing that's been interesting, and again, it's around the harvesting season in the potato market. It's not, we've had projects where you look for golf balls, and because when the potatoes are picked, if they're, I guess, apparently near a driving range, or maybe somebody's hitting golf balls out in their fields, but when potatoes are picked, the golf balls somewhat mimic the potato, and so we've seen some of that situation as well.
Maybe just a continuation of that, not about golf in particular, even though I would love to talk about golf for a while. But these contaminants, they vary by industry quite a bit. But there's the processing ones are maybe more, I don't know, maybe homogeneous, I guess is different as the word I'm looking for, that metal screws, nuts, bolts, gaskets, and things. But do they all vary by industry, or is it more industry agnostic on the contaminations?
They tend to vary by industry. It really depends on how much you're really in the processing, how much, I guess, disruption is in the processing, maybe is a good way to put it. If you got slicer blades and those kind of things, and you tend to have obviously more metal contamination and that kind of thing. You're looking for excess bone or unwanted bone is something that's somewhat typical in the protein industry, poultry, pork, and beef. But it's very specific in terms of the industry. In terms of the work that we do at FlexRay, metal is metal is by far the most frequent request that we get. Even though people have metal detectors, you're only detecting down to a certain size, and so that's the most frequent. And then within the protein industry, bone is right there with metal. And then outside of that, it really kind of depends on the industry. And Amanda, like I said, she mentioned several of the contaminants that we deal with.
Amanda, any other thoughts on just variability by industry that you would like to add?
Yeah, I think Kurt had a pretty well-rounded response there. We look at the most concerns in foreign material. I'll speak specifically to the dairy industry right now. It's not just the dairy industry, but any inclusions or ingredients that we work with. By far, metal, soft plastic, and hard plastic are the most common foreign material. They're going to come from the processing ingredients, both at the supplier end and within the manufacturing facilities. What I do want to highlight in the plastic is to not overlook packaging materials. So the packaging that the ingredient comes in can also be a foreign material risk, and working with suppliers to ensure that packaging is designed in a way to minimize that is pretty critical too. Interesting.
Yeah, never thought about that. And I think the general population would be surprised that plastic and metals would be in a dairy facility, but there's a lot of blending, a lot of fast moving things, and maintenance misplaces things on occasion. Things wear out and break at that time. Kurt, did you have something else to add there? No?
No, I think it's spot on, in terms of what we're seeing. But it is, Amanda did mention soft plastics, hard plastics. The reality of the X-ray world is, soft, low dense plastics are difficult to find. Even with the technology that we've got, the next generation level technology, it's just they're typically such a low density contaminant that it's very difficult to find them, even if you're doing a project, out of the case versus in the case. And that's one thing that's, when we're talking with our customers, and it's, I guess disappointing for us and disappointing for them, because when you get into those bag liners and safety glasses and glove tips, it's not common that we're going to be able to find those. So it ends up, a situation where the customer's got to make a decision on what they're going to do with the product, since we can't find it, and help them segregate the bad product out of the lot. So
we've talked a lot more at the processing plant itself, but this webinar and roundtable is about like the suppliers, right? So then when you do audits, so let's talk a little bit about foreign materials and what role they play when you're doing supplier audits to, like your own internal stringent code, or to GFSI kind of a thing, or FSMA if that applies, and it should apply to everybody now. But how does foreign material play into supplier audits? Is kind of the general question.
Yep, great question. So it really always starts back with a risk assessment of the ingredient and the supplier. So back to, we need to understand what the risk is and where that control will be. So some good references is the FDA ingredient hazard assessment, the CFIA ingredient hazard assessment, which is from Canada, and then any global recall information. So your first place is to look at those, and they're going to be a really good source of what are the inherent risks, or the incidence of foreign material, what type of foreign material in the ingredient, and also the supplier. So we start with that risk assessment. The next step is again, where is that hazard controlled? So ideally, you would like all hazards controlled at the supplier, and then you just control your hazards within. So we'll speak today on specifically how do you look at controlling them at the supplier site. Very similar to what you would do internally, but again, starting with tool accountability. What is their tool accountability program to make sure that they don't have either tools or parts of tools making it into the ingredient? Infrastructure review. So the basic infrastructure, right? The building materials, the walls, the ceilings. But then just what's around. Is it open product? How are they controlling that? Everything's in good condition, the maintenance. The good manufacturing practices, that gets into some of what Kurt was referencing with the gloves, having glove tips or something. But what are the employee practices? So how are we handling jewelry? How are they handling the basic GAPs, whether it's gloves or aprons, hair nets? Everything's in place. Pens, pencils, buttons on uniforms, just doing a full review of that. So after that, looking at prevention, what is in the stream from a prevention? So those could be things like screens in place, they could be filters in place, or sieves to sort some of the foreign material out. So reviewing what they have in place. Detection, that's where we get into metal detectors or X-rays to detect if something does get passed. Again, this should be part of their preventive control plan for their physical hazards, and just seeing what they have and is it sufficient to catch the hazard that is potentially has the impact to the product. And then if there is I think a critical piece that we shouldn't forget about is if everybody's going to have an incident. In manufacturing, things come up. So what is their when they do have an incident, what's their response to it? So are they doing a really good root cause analysis? And then are they doing good corrective action and preventive action with a high focus on the preventive action to prevent that from happening again? So really dig into that root cause and corrective and preventive action plans. I'd say it's suspect if they never have any foreign material, so dig into those. And then finally, auditing for compliance. So everyone should have layered auditing. As a manufacturer, you're auditing your suppliers. but they should also be auditing. Are they auditing that any of their PC checks are being done properly? Are they checking auditing their metal detectors? Are they auditing GMP practices across all shifts, all days, to make sure that everybody's complying with GMPs? And then are they auditing their verifications as well? So is there layered auditing in place to ensure all of these are being monitored?
Yeah. I just like to go back to one of the things you mentioned was the root cause analysis and the corrective action, preventative action. My experience has been that a lot of times it's just never discovered. Like things just happen and they can't find it. But is your experience that they actually can get down to a cause, like an event that caused a issue in a plant? Or if it's continuous, what do you do as a supplier has issues? Like, what do you do if it's chronic or whatever? And so 2 questions there, I guess, is one is, can you really solve the problem? And if it's not solved, what do you do? But then if there's chronic issues, what do you do?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely a team discussion to look into. So are there cases where we just can't find where the material came from? Absolutely. Hopefully that's the minority. Yeah. And at some point along, whether the supplier or your manufacturing process, that you do capture it. But most times, if you dig deep enough, especially if it's chronic, you should be able to, with the right, expertise and the right resources, determine it. I'd say don't, as a manufacturer, definitely try to partner with the suppliers if there's a chronic issue. Yeah. Partner with them to go on site and help dig into it in a positive, productive way. It should never, from a food safety perspective, it should be pre-competitive. So we should be sharing, different tools and ideas of how to prevent these issues. So more times than not, just, open communication on site, working through these issues. I think we should be able to come to a resolution. Yeah.
I agree.
And the key is preventive action, right? So putting it in place for permanent. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not good for either the supplier or the processor to have issues like this. I mean, there's just like to solve it. Yep. That makes it. But Kurt, you were going to say something. Yep. Sorry, I think I may have cut you off.
No. Amanda had mentioned the value of preventive maintenance as part of the process, and as part of a shift changeover or sanitation process. I think one of the keys, or a key there, is the team being aware of and understanding the equipment that they're working on, and that if they're sanitizing, if they're taking a look at every day, when you're breaking down a line. I had an example this week where I had a potential customer gave me a call and said, "Hey, we realized during the process, and that we had one of our slicer blades started sometime during the process started chipping off." They didn't know where, but they knew that it happened because they knew at the beginning of the line it wasn't there, and they knew at the end of the shift changeover or the line changeover it was there. So now they had a couple 100,000 pounds of product maybe that potentially had some of these chips of metal in there. And so I think it's attention to detail and really understanding what's going on in a facility, and having the quality and maintenance technicians trained to do that the right way is really where you're going to get ahead of some of this stuff from a preventative standpoint.
Yeah. Does lot size matter? I mean, just thinking about in a supplier or whatever, just controlling lots to so many hours of production or in a day. I'm not sure exactly what I'm asking, but does that help in kind of defining and bracketing the potential problem?
Better let Amanda answer that one. I may go outside the rails on that. So Amanda, I'll let you take care of that.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if lot size necessarily matters as far as your, or if it's more important to do your checks. So if you have a blade, then don't just check it during sanitation breaks. Is there a way to check it more frequently? Can you check it hourly or every 4 hours? So it's about limiting scope with that risk. So where are the risks, and how do you put in different monitoring tools in place, and then how do you limit that scope impact? So it's not necessarily lot size when we're talking physical hazards as much as it is the monitoring during the production or during the manufacturing pieces of it. Yeah.
So the bracketing, I think it's the word we commonly heard used is bracketing. So you're bracketing certain lot or certain amounts of the lot so you can take action on it in one particular area.
Yeah. Just a follow-up that more on the how the program's designed. I mean, that was something that we talked about in a pre-meeting before, but maybe just a little bit of how are the programs designed overall when you're doing audits with Supplier?
Yep. So again, I'm going to speak to FDA, and Kurt may be able to share some USDA pieces. But again, physical hazards is one of the 3 hazards that you're controlling with your food safety plans under FSMA. So really going through that process of where are physical hazards present and is a preventive control step needed at that point. And again, using those references we talked about, the FDA ingredient hazard list, the CFIA ingredient hazard list, and the recall information to say what it, especially from ingredients coming in, where is my risk, and identifying those physical hazards and preventive control. And really from there, do you just design it? So what is the risk? If it's metal, then you're looking at what is my metal detection or my x-ray needs. If it's other things, do you have screens or sieves in place, or it's depending on what the foreign material is.
Excellent.
Yeah, I think that's common within USDA and FDA, and when you start really digging into it from a supplier monitoring program versus the end user, it kind of, you have to start looking back at, or you have to start looking at what is the end user requiring of their suppliers as well as part of specification around foreign material. And I know we'll probably get into that a little bit later when we dig into the ins and outs of a supplier program. But it's one of those things that you typically will see microbiological requirements within a specification. You'll typically see chemistry or chemical requirements, quality checks, wage counts, measures, those type of things. Sometimes you'll see that the foreign material piece is a bit looser within a specification in terms of a specific requirement. It's more of a product needs to be free of contaminants and those kind of things versus a specific monitoring process or a specific number of evaluations to determine that. So I think that's an area where it's a little different than some of the other things that you typically see involved in terms of foodborne recalls and those kind of things.
Yeah. You've both mentioned in-plant metal detection systems, and trying to maybe for supplier monitoring, how important are they to have in-plant, and then how relationship-wise, how does FlexRay, maybe more of a question for Kurt, but both of you, I would throw it out to, like, is that not adequate? I mean, Kurt, you said size and sensitivity maybe, but are they good hand in glove kind of systems? Are they both part of a quality system, or how do they go together? And do most processors now, even suppliers, have metal detection in plant or X-ray equipment in plant?
Yeah, I'll kick that off with. Yeah, I'll kick that off with just, as you design your supplier monitoring, if they have a risk of metal that by definition is an inherent risk that requires a preventive control, then they should have some sort of, whether it's metal detector or X-ray in their process. You can reference the, things like, is it, choking hazard size? Is it a sharp that would cause injury or death? The FDA has those definitions and what those sizes are. So you can start with that. But again, it's what is the risk? And then can they get down to that level? So if there's a risk of metal, then it would, unless you're planning on doing that preventive control within your facility, they'll need to have a preventive control in place. That should be able to capture kind of the most common sizes as well. So what is the most common, size of that? Their metal detector X-ray should be able to do that. When we get into more like maybe special cause, that might be where Kurt can add some more information.
Yeah, it's in terms of frequency of having inline metal detectors, and I think Kevin, you even mentioned inline X-rays. I think the percentage of facilities that do not have inline X-ray machines is much, much, much lower than those that do. For the matter of fact, I think pretty much all manufacturing facilities at this point either have a metal detector or a sieve type program in place. And so that's not uncommon. But the reality is that's, they're there for a reason, and that's to identify and find if there's a problem or an issue. And and they're doing their job. That's, they identify that it's there, they identify that there's a problem there. And I think you'd mentioned, how do we work together in that situation? Well, if we go back to that conversation around bracketing, how do you bracket product? If you have a situation where you're finding, you get metal rejects over a period of time within a lot run, then you got to make a decision. What are you going to do? Because something's going on. You may not know where it's coming from, but something's going on. And if you've got 100,000 pounds on hold, or 200,000, whatever it may be, now you got to figure out what you're going to do with it. And your options are typically to either landfill it, which nobody wants to do in today's world, because you want to keep product in commerce. And you want to keep, from a sustainability standpoint, it's key to keep it in commerce.
Right.
Reworking it internally, which many times means you got to shut down a line that you're otherwise producing on. So therefore you're reducing product in commerce again. You got to pay people to go back and rework the product, or you identify, third party like FlexRay to do that work. And so, that's where we work really closely, because we know that people have inline x-rays. We know they have, metal detectors and inline x-ray machines. And it's kind of the same thought process. The inline x-rays do a great job of helping customers, or helping people identify that there's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, how do you address the something? And what are your options to address the something? And that's where we come into play in terms of working with the manufacturers or the suppliers that we're talking about now, to get those taken care of, so that we don't limit the amount of product in commerce, and so that suppliers aren't shorting their customers, that need the product.
Yep. Yeah. So I'm going to kind of piggyback on that and go back to that auditing for compliance at the supplier audit as well. To again, in a manufacturing world, things happen and there's a reason why it's in place. So when you're at a supplier, really dig into their records. They should have some records of finding hits. And then again, what was the root cause? What was the corrective action? And then what was their kind of the bracketing containment decisions as well? And understand, are they taking the right measures when those things do happen, to protect, the product stream too.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that in-plant systems typically are like for more gross contaminations, or more of a heads up or an early warning system? Or how would you identify, or how would you describe in-plant systems like that versus what FlexRay does? I'm just looking at compare contrast.
Yep. Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the dairy industry again, the one we're most familiar with. Our metal detectors and x-rays are in place to detect an event that happened. It's a special cause, unusual event that happened. We detect it happened. It's not to catch routine metal coming through the system. That's not its purpose in the line. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That
Yeah, and Kevin, you ask about the difference, and that's exactly right. It's something happened. There's an indication something's going on. But you ask, I think, about the difference in the process. These inline x-rays, inline metal detectors, they're in line. They're truly in line. And typically your food manufacturing lines are running somewhere 100 to 140 feet a minute. So whatever product you're manufacturing, obviously is impacting that. When you're utilizing, and so therefore, not that it's not as sensitive, but to your point, is it a gross contamination? It's more of an indication, because you're running at 100 feet a minute, it's essentially flying through, and there's this automatic kick out process. If it identifies a detector or an x-ray, if it identifies something there, it'll kick the product out. And most of the time in those situations, the product being ran as an individual unit versus, in a case or in a box. With us, the product, the line speed is around 4 feet a minute. So it's extremely slow. And typically the product's ran in a case, a box, however many units might be there. If it's a difficult to find contaminant, we can take the bags out of a case and run just the bags individually on the line, which can enable us to find it sometimes if we can't find it in the case. But even then, we're running at 4 feet a minute. The other thing that's a little bit different is it's not an automatic kick-out process. So with this third-party x-ray, the way we do it with the technology that we use, it's it's looking at flat screens and you're looking for grayscale differentiation within the product that's going through, and whatever the contaminant that might be there is there. In the analogy I like to use with folks, and seems to be resonating, so I'm going to keep using it, is TSA pre-check. So when you're traveling, they're taking your suitcase, they're putting it in this big X-ray machine, and you got a person sitting there looking at the screen and looking to make sure you don't have something in there you shouldn't have in there. That's very much like what we do. We're running cases of food through. We got people sitting there, one at the beginning of the line, one at the end of the line, looking to see that whether or not the contaminant that we've tested for is in the product. And if so, we pull it out. If not, we repalletize it and keep it in commerce.
Very good. I like that analogy, quite honestly. Yeah, I think that resonates well. Just to follow up, more my curiosity maybe is something that of interest to me, that when you were talking about that. So it shows up in a plant, in a supplier, that, oh, we've got an issue. You received it in a plant, or the plant says, oh, we've got this product now in our production and we caught something. How often when you scan looking for a known contaminant, maybe it's more of a Kurt question, do you find an additional contaminant? And as you're looking for metal, but then you find gasket or plastic, and then how does that process go on? How do those dialogues go, and how does that get communicated back to the supplier if it goes through a processor? I'm kind of curious as to that evolution of the dialogue and the we found what you were looking for, but we also found other things.
Yeah, it's I would like to say it's uncommon, but it's really not uncommon. It's one of those things that we tell our customers up front, or we ask our customers up front, because let's take metal as the example. So let's say your primary contaminant you're looking for is stainless, and if your primary contaminant that you're looking for is stainless, what you're doing in that situation is you're going to get a sample of the product in. You're going to embed the seed into the product, and we're going to test the product to see if we can find stainless down to a certain size. And if we can find stainless down to a certain size, that's the baseline that you're using for the inspection. Now, what you can do with the customers, you can say, all right, stainless is the seed. That's the primary. That's what we're looking for. If we see any contaminant down to that size, do you want us to pull it out? And the answer is typically yes, because they want to know if there's something going on, if there's a problem. And so it's not uncommon, but there typically is the base contaminant that you're looking for that kind of sets the baseline for what you're doing. And I saw in the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and answer this because it was an interesting question. Somebody asking, how small can we find bone? Like in a poultry product, and it depends on the matrix of, in that case, the matrix of the poultry. Is it a frozen bone, or is it a product that's got skin on it? Depending on really what you're looking at. We go through this testing process. You can't seed a bone sample in the product because the bone denatures, and when it denatures, it's hard to see. So we basically use a ceramic seed to mimic bone. And it's not uncommon to find your bone, down to, in terms of a seeding process, down to 1.5 to 1 millimeter. But you can find it smaller. You start to find slivers. But when you do that, then you're in a situation. Is it really is it a health hazard? Is it really a quality hazard? Because sometimes you get to a point where it's a kind of diminishing return thing. But what you have to be very careful of, especially if bone is involved in the process, and let's say you set a baseline using stainless at, let's say, 1.5 millimeter. That's what you need to be looking for, is 1.5 millimeter. You don't want to be looking for 1.5 millimeter stainless and then saying we're going to pull out any and all bone, because it won't be. It's possible you find bone in a smaller size, and then all of a sudden you're pulling out an extensive number of cases that are rejected based on the fact that your base standard that you tested to is actually higher than some of the secondary contaminants that you're pulling out. And that's a conversation that we have to have with the customers up front and make sure that that's clear.
Amanda, anything to add to that at all? Is that something that you've experienced, just finding a different contaminant versus one that you've targeted?
We have. It's not common for us, but we have found that I would say, just to kind of tie that back to the supplier side, then that becomes again another follow-up supplier event, right? So you have an event, you do the root cause, and you get to what you feel is good corrective and preventive action. So just making sure that every single time one of these comes through, just like in your facility, again, if you're under FDA with a food safety plan, you have to have a follow-up plan or follow-up reaction and a good CAPA for everything. Just making sure that you follow up with the supplier every time too, so that they're aware of it, but then also making sure that they have done what they can to prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, very good. Just maybe a quick reminder to participants dialing in and watching today's roundtable. If you do have any questions, please go ahead and click on the Q&A tab in the toolbar, or that little dialog box. You see two dialog boxes under Q&A, and then type in your question. It looks like we may have some time towards the end to address some of those. A follow-up question maybe that, again, more of my curiosity is, Amanda, maybe start with this one, is like, if you have a supplier, they've got a certain risk assessment that you've talked about, and they've set a standard of, hey, we're going to do metal detection, we're going to look at this. They have a maintenance program to replace gaskets or whatever they have in their operation on a routine basis. But who ultimately sets the standard of what's permissible? Is it the supplier, or is that you as the processor? Like, who has a sway on what's permissible in the product? And then is it times where they can't control it down to that permissible level or acceptable level, and then you have that dialogue? But more general question is like, who develops or sets the standard for vendors or suppliers?
Oh, that's a good question. So my answer is going to be both. So there is the piece of, in your final product, what is the acceptable standard, right? So we set as manufacturers what the acceptable standard is of our finished product. And then we need to source ingredients that will help us comply with that. But there is also the capability of the supplier. Is the supplier capable to get to that level? Yeah. So I'll use an example of maybe like olive pits. Olives going to one manufacturer, one, customer. Maybe pits are okay. Maybe pits are allowed, or certain pits at a certain size are allowed. But then in another customer of theirs or another product, then there's no pits are allowed. Maybe it's the consumer base or what the particular product is. So it is a discussion on basically your final product, what's acceptable, what the supplier is capable of giving you, what is their capability, and then where does that control lie? So this is back to, at the end of the day, you need to control it somewhere. Yeah. If the supplier cannot control it, then you need to control it at your facility and your process, or maybe it's an option like a third party that's also scanning and filtering out which ingredients aren't going to be acceptable to use or not. So just because you set a specification doesn't mean that every supplier is able to meet that specification.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kurt, any other thoughts on that, like standards and acceptable levels of contaminants? Like you mentioned size, that's where it kind of popped into my brain, that you can find smaller sometimes, but that's not what the customer wants or the supplier wants. So it's just, that's the basis of the question, I guess. But any other thoughts there?
Yeah, it's I think it does go back, and and Amanda's mentioned it several times, the setting the expectation with a supplier during the audit process of a supplier. And one thing that we've seen start to occur a bit more is when end users are looking at potential new suppliers or potential co-packers of product, as part of their due diligence of that new supplier or co-packer, one of the things that they're doing is, I think, Amanda, you referenced this, is looking at their records around foreign material, X-ray metal detection, but also as part of that due diligence is saying, hey, your first production run of our product, would like for you to send 8 or 10 pallets of product in to a third party for X-ray inspection, so that we make sure that there's not something being introduced in the process that neither of us are expecting, because nobody wants it to happen. You're not expecting, but it's just, again, it's part of that developing the standard and setting the expectation of the supplier as part of building that relationship as you go through it.
Yeah, very good. No, that helps clarify that. So you just mentioned that prior to maybe accepting of a supplier that you could be asked as FlexRay could be asked to be scanning a lot before they're even an accepted supplier. But what's the ratio, or what one-off like routine basis testing or scanning versus during events that they know there's something that you need, they're just asking you to find it. So how much is that upfront maybe piece or continuous monitoring that you get involved with? And maybe it's just different levels of quality, but then versus, hey, we had an event and they send product to FlexRay. What's that look like right now? And is that shifting in the last 5 years?
It's, right now it's 95% or 95% plus event or, episodic based, when something's occurring or an issue's going on. Mm-hmm. And that does make, if you're in the third party X-ray business, it makes it a bit challenging, because you from day to day, week to week, it's hard to know what's coming into a facility in terms of the inspection. But in terms of shifting, or is it shifting? There's not a major shift yet. But we are seeing some things that are becoming a bit more routine. We have certain customers right now that we know we're going to get 1 or 2 truckloads every 2 weeks as part of their routine monitoring process. And it's kind of the verification or validation step, depending on where it's at. Not within a HACCP program, but within a risk mitigation program, where they're looking at their own internal practices and they're utilizing that 1 or 2 trucks a month for that purpose, or every couple of weeks for that purpose. We've also got a couple of situations right now where some of our customers have gotten, or they have some suppliers that they know that they've had foreign material contaminant challenges with, over time or in the past. And as part of that, as they continue to work with those suppliers and try to build relationships with those suppliers, in those situations, you'll get some opportunities where, hey, if we're going to buy from you, you're going to have it X-rayed, via third party, or at least for a period of time until we get this known challenge or this known issue we've got worked out. And we've got 2 or 3 of those programs that are going on right now as well. One of the things that's a little different when you look at it from this perspective is not necessarily the product supplier itself, but it's some of the pieces that are used, or the equipment that's used. The hardware is a better word. The hardware used in a manufacturing environment. And what we've seen in that situation is where companies themselves they've realized that over time that, hey, some of these really cheap, thin rubber gaskets, if they break, they're going to break at some point in time. But when they do, you can't even find them via X-ray because they're such a low density product. Or there's actually some conveyor belts that are plastic conveyor belts that are kind of the same way. And what we started to see happening is some customers that are looking at their the hardware that goes into their facilities, and they're looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, if it breaks or if something happens, is it something we can find either via our inline X-ray machine or third party? Because if it's not, then let's upgrade the hardware that we're using in our facilities so that, God forbid something happens, but should an episode happen, at least we know we've got hardware in the environment that can be recovered either inline or via third party X-ray.
Excellent. No, very helpful. I don't know if there's a follow-up to that in my mind off the top of my head. That routine versus event is interesting, 95.5. You had mentioned one thing, Kurt, about the detectable levels, and I think the question you mentioned was about bone and chicken. But is there just general guidance as to, if anyone wants to know that's listening in or will follow up and watch this later, of just by contaminant, if it's stainless or bone, gasket, or whatever size, how much does it have to do with the substrate or whatever the product it's found in, like a ground chicken versus a chicken breast or something like that? So are there common ones that, and there's certain sizes that you see that here's what we can find typically, it's versus it depends, or is it a lot of it depends?
Yeah, and I'm gonna stick with it. It depends, because invariably, if I put a number out there, then somebody's gonna hang on to that, because it does depend on the contaminant in question and the matrix that the contaminant's in. Yeah, and it's all about the differential between the density of the product and the density of the contaminant. And so, that's why we go through the testing process, to make sure that we can if we say we're going to be able to find the contaminant, we have to test and know that we can find the contaminant. Coming from the world of food testing, sometimes I use the analogy of, if you're utilizing a platform, a testing platform for salmonella testing. If you're going to be doing salmonella testing, well, that testing platform has to be validated against the particular product matrix and a particular sample size that it's going to be used for. And it's the same thing in the work that we do. If we're going to be looking for metal, if we're going to be looking for stainless or ferrous or whatever it is, unless we've tested that specific matrix for you before for that specific contaminant, we're always going to ask that we do that test, because we've got to validate that we can find what we tell you we're going to find.
Yeah, that gets back to Amanda. Maybe that's why I was asking. Maybe I wasn't real clear, but maybe it just helped that the last couple of minutes with talking about, with Kurt about this is, how do you set the standard then if it does depend that much? Like, how do you set the specification for your own product, but let alone suppliers' products, on what's acceptable and what's fine, detectable kind of thing? And I don't know if there's any more you would add based on Kurt's comments.
Great. I mean, in general, the goal is always no foreign material in your product.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And to have this ongoing stream of something dumping foreign material into your products, it's just not acceptable. So it does go back to those kind of basic things, right? Kurt talked about gaskets. Do you have the right gasket? Do you have the right monitoring change program? All of the different pieces, the preventive stuff up front is going to be critical. Detection is really your last option. It's more about preventing it to get in, or screening it out, different things like that, versus detecting just shows that you have an issue and you may or may not catch it depending what it is. All of those preventives, the DMPs, the infrastructure, the PM maintenance programs, that's really critical, both in our manufacturing facilities and in suppliers too. And detection should just be the last check.
Perfect. No, that very helpful. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We do have a question from a participant today. It's from Anonymous, but regardless, it's a question. I'm not sure which one of you, maybe more of a Kurt question, but I'll read this verbatim. When visually inspecting, what is your guaranteed detection percentage? And again, it may be what we're talking about. I think this fits in pretty well. And what is your probability of detection guarantee? So what is your guaranteed detection percentage, and what is the probability of your detection guarantee?
So we look at what we do, X-ray inspection as science, and I think as probably everybody on this call knows, science is not perfect. So we can't guarantee with 100% that everything we're going to inspect, that we're going to find everything that's there. It's just, it's science, and it's not possible. What we do as part of this testing process is we're looking for the ability to be able to see the seed size that we're testing with 98, 99% repeatability. So as we're looking through it, we're testing, we need to be able to see it 98, 99% of the time as we go through. And if we can do that, then we're like, look, this is the percentage that we can see it, and we're ready to roll, and we can move forward with the project. Now, up until several months ago, if we didn't have that level of repeatability in the testing process, we would tell a customer, no, we can't move forward with the project because we felt like that was something that needed to be done. But what's happened is we started having some customers saying, okay, you can't see it at that level of repeatability, but can you see it? And so now we're having conversations with customers more around risk-based discussions of, we can see it, we can only see it 85% of the time. And we've had some customers, depending on the product matrix, depending on the final disposition of the product, if it's an ingredient, where the ingredient's going, is it going to be a choking hazard, not a choking hazard? It's going to be a safety hazard, not a safety hazard, versus quality issue. that have made some risk-based decisions to move forward and utilize some of the product, again, based on the disposition, so that they're not having to landfill product. We think that's a good thing for the industry, and it gives people the opportunity to essentially manage their own business versus us kind of telling them, managing their business for them, because we're telling them we can't find this repeatability, we're not going to do the project. And that's been a good thing, and I think our customers appreciate the dialogue around that and the ability to make those decisions.
Yeah, as you dive into this, there's layers and layers of kind of it depends, but all very true as far as how each situation is a little bit different based on the contaminant and the matrix or whatever the food product is that you're looking at.
Yeah.
Anything else to add to that, Amanda, at all? I mean, just a final thought.
No, I mean, I think Kurt summarized that one pretty well.
All right. We're getting close to the top of the hour, and we don't have another question that I'm aware of. Let me look in here. Here we do. We have one last question, and I think we can squeeze this in. This is from Megan. What do you think is the percent of meat suppliers that have inline metal detection in their stuffing department? So this must be a grinder of some kind. We're looking into stuffing metal detection as a step before the products hit our packaging metal detection. As you said, we experienced a birdshot problem and are currently working with FlexRay. So I don't know if you want to answer that in the webinar here, the roundtable, but what percent of suppliers have metal detection, inline metal detection in their stuffing department? It must be post-grind, pre-stuffing.
Yeah, Megan, I don't know enough about each individual supplier to be able to answer that, especially if it's specific to a department. I would feel very comfortable in saying that pretty much all of them have it at some point during their processing environment. But with it being specific to the stuffing department, I'm not equipped to answer that accurately.
Okay, maybe we can get back to them from a technical perspective if there's something else we could answer in the post roundtable.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think this brings us up to our wrap-up portion of the webinar. I want to be very respectful of everyone's time that dialed in today. And a big thank you to Kurt and Amanda for sharing your experiences and insights on supplier monitoring with a focus on foreign material contamination. So thank you both very much. Also, a thank you for all the participants that called in and dialed in and spent part of your day participating, and especially those that asked a few questions that made it much more interesting and enjoyable for everybody in learning. Please look for a follow-up email that will provide a link to the recorded webinar for reference, as well as a survey to provide us feedback on the quality and the content of the webinar. The webinar will also be broadcast or be available on the www.flexray.com website. It's been my pleasure to host today's roundtable. We hope that we provided valuable information to help you manage and improve your overall food safety program. We're very happy you joined us.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, guys.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day.